Well said there, Olivia, and welcome to the show. This is John OLoughlin and Olivia here, our osprey of the evening, who is looking forward to her friends and relatives coming back to the island in only a few weeks now. They should be back around March 9th or 10th, and of course, Olivia is excited. She knows they're coming. So I'm very happy to let you know that spring is coming, and the first harbingers of spring here on Mystery Island is the return of our beloved ospreys. So that'll be happening soon. Today is what, the 23rd, I guess. So hey, maybe even two weeks from now. Good to see everybody. And tonight, our sponsor, by the way, is Bruce Cost. Bruce Cost Ginger Ale. It's the original. Now, you'll notice that it says ginger ale and not ginger beer, as I usually have, because this is brewed a little bit differently. And I'll tell you, it's not quite as sharp as your Belvoir ginger beer, but it has a sweet and smooth taste of its own that I highly recommend. So tonight's sponsor, Unfiltered Bruce Cost Ginger Ale, the original in 12 fluid ounce bottles. So cheers. Well, this is a pretty exciting week for me because on Saturday I get once again the chance to have a live conversation with none other than the great author Doug Valentine. And hello, David. Hey, hi, Ezra, Corky, Carol, and A. Baker. Good to see everybody. Thanks for being here with me. And thanks again, Andy, behind the scenes there, running the tech for us tonight. So I got an email from Doug in anticipation of our show on Saturday morning at 11 Eastern Time. That's this Saturday, the 27th of February. Well, he said that the book, The CIA as Organized Crime, describes how he bridged across from writing the Phoenix program to writing the Strength of the Wolf, followed by The Strength of the Pack. And yeah, thanks, Andy. So you can see that tomorrow evening, I'll be reviewing the book that I did read at length called The Strength of the Wolf. That's tomorrow night. But because Doug Valentine called particular attention to this book, The CIA, let me try to get that. There you go. The CIA as Organized Crime. I thought, instead of just, going on with the JFK book tonight, I wanted to switch gears. And so here we go. I'm going to countermand the controls here, and we're switching over to Doug Valentine's book, The CIA as Organized Crime. And what I'm going to do tonight is just try to do one of my 1 hour introductory reviews of this book, as I've done with many of the books on the book train. Well, let us start off by the idea itself, okay? The idea is that during World War II with the OSS and then following World War II with the CIA, the CIA and organized crime started working together, and they worked together so much that by now we can say that the CIA is organized crime. And that is the sadness that we have to face right now, because, you can write the books, but if people don't do anything about it, then, if nothing changes, nothing changes. A very pithy and true statement. If nothing changes, nothing changes. So the first chapter in the book is called How William Colby Gave Me the Keys to the CIA Kingdom. And I'm going to skip through that because we've covered that territory a few times already. How he showed up with his Methodist look with a tie on and talked his way into the confidence of William Colby. And from there, he had a ticket to talk to just about anyone he wanted to. And that's how. And I think George Webb has done some good thinking on this too. The question is why? Why did Colby decide to spill so much to Doug Valentine that he was able to do the interviews that are the basis of this great book, the Phoenix Program itself? So the next chapter, one thing leads to another, my rare access in investigating the war on drugs. Well, once again, I'm going to skip over that one because it's, it just details how Doug connected the war in Vietnam to the war on drugs. The next chapter I'm going to read a little bit from, it's chapter 3. And so let's settle in a little bit and have a little something to wet our whistle, and we'll settle in with chapter 3, the Vietnam War's Silver Lining, a bureaucratic model for population control. The CIA's Phoenix program changed how America fights its wars and how the public views this new type of political and psychological warfare in which civilian casualties are an explicit objective. The CIA created Phoenix in Saigon in 1967 to neutralize the leaders and supporters of the communist-led insurgency in South Vietnam. Referred to by the CIA as the Viet Cong Infrastructure, the VCI, the targets were civilians who were working at regular jobs while secretly engaged in administrative and support functions for the armed guerrillas. These people were patriots resisting foreign aggression and seeking to take back their country, but they were considered spies and terrorists. American officials wrote laws that allowed U.S. military forces to detain, torture, and kill them by every means possible, including B-52 raids, battalion-sized cordon and search operations, and death squads. Phoenix was originally called ICEX-SIDE, that's ICEX-SIDE, for Intelligence Coordination and Exploitation Screening, Interrogation, and Detention of the Enemy. But the name was quickly changed for symbolic purposes. In time, the mere mention of Phoenix, the omnipotent bird of prey with a blacklist in one claw and a snake in the other, was enough to terrorize not only targeted members of the VCI, but the entire civilian population. Phoenix evolved from a rifle shot approach to neutralize enemy leaders into a program of systematic repression for the political control of the South Vietnamese people. It sought to accomplish this through a highly bureaucratized system of disposing of people who could not be ideologically assimilated. I can't help but just catch my breath when I think about my dad in that context. Could not be ideologically assimilated. Yeah. The CIA found a legal basis for the program in, quote, emergency decrees and administrative detention laws that enabled American advisors to detain, torture, and kill national security offenders, as the VCI were referred to, without due process. The program was implemented over the objections of the government of Vietnam, who understood that it undermined their national sovereignty. Within this extra-legal judicial system, with its Stalinist security committees, a member of the VCI was anyone who didn't actively support the government. To be neutral or advocate for peace was viewed as supporting terrorism. Proof wasn't required, just the word of an anonymous informer. The psychological warfare aspect of Phoenix was so pervasive that people had to watch every word they said. Advocating peace with the communists was punishable by imprisonment without trial for 2 years or even death under the administrative detention laws. And the threat of being detained was a boondoggle for corrupt officials and professional criminals on the CIA payroll. Persons arrested as VCI suspects or sympathizers were released only when their families scraped together enough money to bribe the local security committee members. As a result, CIA officer Lucien Conin described Phoenix as the greatest blackmail scheme ever invented. If you don't do what I want, you're a VC. Modeled by its creator, Nelson Brickham, on Ford Motor Company's, quote, command post structure, Phoenix concentrated power in a chief executive officer and an operating committee at the top of the embassy's organizational chart. The chief executive position, the deputy for civil operations and revolutionary development, oversaw the Phoenix Directorate in Saigon. The directorate was headed by a CIA officer, supported by a statistical reporting unit, which assigned a quota of 1,800 neutralizations a month to the Phoenix coordinators who ran the program in the field. But Phoenix was a CIA program, and deniability was one of its main objectives, so the CIA left gaping holes in its safety net in order to facilitate the systematic corruption that ensured the program's true but unstated objective of terrifying the entire civilian population into submission. As CIA officer Frank Snepp wrote in Decent Interval, quote, the Phoenix strike teams opted for a scattershot approach, picking up anyone who might be a suspect, and eventually, when the jails were packed to overflowing, they began simply taking the law, such as it was, into their own hands. The program existed in relative secrecy until June 1969, when numerous South Vietnamese legislators complained in open session about Phoenix abuses. Everyone knew that thousands of innocent people were being extorted, jailed, and killed, but the complicit American press corps never reported it. And in the absence of any objection by the American public, the CIA had no reason to relent. It was not until late 1970, when a handful of anti-war Phoenix veterans exposed the program's many abuses, that Congress finally launched an investigation. But even then, thanks to the skillful dissembling on the part of William Colby, the erstwhile deputy for civil operations and revolutionary development in charge of Phoenix, the CIA was able to shirk any responsibility. At congressional hearings into Phoenix in 1971, Representative Ogden Reed of New York asked Colby, quote, do you state categorically that Phoenix has never perpetrated the premeditated killing of a civilian in a non-combat situation? Conflating stated policy with operational reality, the master of, quote, doublespeak replied, quote, Phoenix as a program has never done that. Individual members of it may have done it, but as a program, it is not designed to do that. Colby, to put it mildly, lied. In actuality, the Phoenix program was designed to be mismanaged, to open the door to and incentivize bribery, corruption, and terror as an unstated policy lever for ensuring domination over the Vietnamese population. So that is the first few pages of chapter 3. And you can see where that leads us, in today when we say, well, okay, the CIA has figured out the silver lining to the Vietnam War. The Phoenix program is now a model for population control. And what are the tools? The tools are detention, random arrests, lack of due process, terrorism, and death squads. And how far are we, or are we there already in this country? And just as with Vietnam, we didn't know because the press didn't report it. It makes me think of those homeopathic physicians and chiropractors and things that would just disappear or get disappeared. The sudden deaths of people, and you can include de Mohrenschelt himself. How many people that were witnesses to the JFK assassination themselves ended up assassinated? And is this maybe a JTTF function, something that is going to be applied by these prepositioned militarized police? And that's where I start thinking, this military occupation of the Capitol is just such a bad sign. You've seen the pictures with the barbed wire. I mean the concertina wire on the 11-foot chain link fences, and the soldiers. Soldiers guarding with military weapons, guarding the Capitol of the United States. And people think that's not a coup. It looks like a coup. It walks like a coup. It quacks like a coup. It's a coup. You don't use military force in a civil government. You're not supposed to be using military against your own people. The military is supposed to be for foreign wars. And there we go. Nobody's saying anything. Nobody's like, wow, how can you close the Capitol and ring it with fences and military people and still say we have a republic? No, you don't. It's over. It's a coup. Just use your eyes. Don't pretend you're not seeing what you're seeing. And then, the military is the people that are developing these Phoenix doctrines. The next chapter, the Afghan dirty war escalates. NPR was badly embarrassed in 2000 when it was revealed that the PSYOP personnel from Fort Bragg were working in Washington, D.C. newsrooms, apparently as interns. The PSYOP from Fort Bragg? Hello? Yeah. Top managers were said to be unaware of the arrangement, which was blamed on people in its personnel department. However, based on NPR's cozy relationship with the military and its penchant to spew pro-military propaganda, some say the P in NPR stands for Pentagon. Media watchdogs, myself included, believed the PSYOP soldiers were penetration agents meant to influence news coverage. In any event, on the 30th of December 2009, I listened in dismay as an NPR terrorism expert condemned the suicide bombing that had killed 7 CIA employees in Afghanistan a few days earlier. That particular act of terrorism, the expert said, was especially hideous because the murdered CIA officers were spreading economic development, democracy, and love as members of a provincial reconstruction team. No less disingenuous were the comments of CIA Director Leon Panetta, who said that the deceased did, quote, the hard work that must be done to protect our country from terrorism, unquote. or fuel terrorism, as the case may be. President Obama added his 2 cents, saying the fallen CIA officers were part of a long line of patriots who have made great sacrifices for their fellow citizens and for our way of life. Our way of life in the 21st century means full spectrum dominance and a burgeoning precariat. On New Year's Day 2010, the story of the martyred CIA officers having expired, Washington Post staff writers Joby Warwick and Pamela Constable ventured beyond the initial spin. Rather than cast the CIA officers as heroes, they hinted at the murderous activities they were involved in. Warwick and Constable said the CIA officers were secretly, quote, at the heart of a covert program overseeing strikes by the agency's remote-controlled aircraft along the AFPAC border. So much for spreading love and development. In 2009, CIA drone strikes killed more than 300 people, perhaps as many as 700, all of whom were invariably described as, quote, suspected terrorists, jihadists, or militants, a word never applied to Americans. Neither the U.S. government nor the media ever make any distinction between nationalists defending their country from foreign invaders and real terrorists who have inflicted intentional violence against civilians to achieve a political objective, i.e., the classic definition of terrorism. And we see in Afghanistan the provincial reconstruction teams, the PSYOPs, the PRT, and the way that Vietnam model is used in Afghanistan. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here because there's a whole lot of interesting chapters. The next one I think I'll stop on is called The CIA in Ukraine. Wait a minute, the CIA in Ukraine? How can we talk about the CIA in Ukraine in a book that was published back in 2017 of things written earlier? Well, CIA's been in Ukraine a long time. This is an interview, and I'll just recite both the interviewer and Doug's responses. Here's Ryan Dawson. This is Ryan Dawson of the ANC Report. With me today is Doug Valentine. I'm going to be asking him tonight about the CIA's role in Ukraine and infiltrating the media. I want to ask you about the organization working with NGOs in the Ukraine. It's called United Action Center. I want to read something short from their page and get your thoughts. It says, quote, the NGO Center UA has a strong professional human potential. The team has experience running projects in the sphere of European and Euro-Atlantic integration. At the same time, the Center UA, that's United Action, consists of experts and activists who have experience in journalism, public service, PR, public activities, etc. Also, the Center UA has an extensive database of contacts with international experts, politicians, and journalists. At the moment, the Center UA is the coordinator of the New Citizens Public Campaign, which brings together around 40 NGOs. We know from the Carl Bernstein report that on the media, how much the CIA has infiltrated the media. Could you give your thoughts about Center UA and what they are doing with 40 NGOs, supposedly to promote democracy and have activists with experienced journalists working together? And here's Doug Valentine's response. The Center UA is the organization that Pierre Omidyar, that's O-M-I-D-Y-A-R, Pierre Omidyar, co-funded 2 years ago. Center UA is an umbrella organization that is linked to various activist projects and NGOs. one of which is the New Citizen campaign, which, according to the Financial Times, quote, played a big role in getting the protest up and running. In fact, according to the Kiev Post, the Center UA received more than $500,000 in 2012. The protest that we're talking about is the one that leads to the Maidan Square massacre and the coup in 2014. Nearly 54% of which comes from PACT Incorporated, a project funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development. Listen, if anybody ever offers you AID, say, no, thank you, I don't need your aid. Nearly 36% came from the Omidyar Network, a foundation established by eBay founder Pierre Omidyar and his wife. Other donors included the International Renaissance Foundation, whose key funder is billionaire George Soros, and the National Endowment for Democracy, funded largely by the U.S. Congress. Why did Omidyar prove willing to come on board with such known regime change sponsors as USAID and NED, to say nothing of Soros? Where else is he cooperating? It should never be forgotten that this is the kind of company he keeps. Why? While Omidyar was born in Paris and his parents moved to Maryland from France when he was young, he appears to be of Iranian descent. His mother was a Farsi linguist, and as of 2016 is president of the Roshan Cultural Heritage Institute. As bizarre as it may seem, little information is publicly available about his father, including his name. He apparently was a urologist or surgeon at Johns Hopkins, and if that was the case, his name should be available. The secrecy suggests some sort of intelligence connection, perhaps to the type of upper-class émigré circles the CIA cultivates in America. It is a fact that the CIA station in Iran served as one of the agency's main bases for agent operations against the Soviets. The CIA and Mossad created SAVAK, the Shah's notorious internal political security service, and the Shah in turn gave the CIA a free hand to run operations against the Soviets. Maybe Pierre Omidyar is accessible to U.S. foreign policy agencies due to some prior family connections. Maybe that accounts for why he spent a few $100,000 to help put Center UA in place in the Ukraine, so the CIA could run operations against the Russians, like it did out of Iran. I've never heard any explanation from the inquisitive Glenn Greenwald. When it comes to his sugar daddy's monkey business, Greenwald's policy is pure, quote, see no, hear no, speak no evil. Why? Is that the quid pro quo for the handout? What I do know is that billionaires like Omidyar and George Soros and the Rockefellers, to say nothing of USAID and NED, aren't funding political action out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing it to advance their interests. That's why an organization like Center UA is created, to advance the interests of its financial backers. To me, it looks like a CIA-facilitated mechanism to create a crisis in Ukraine and exploit it. The 40 NGOs it coordinates are perfectly placed to provide cover for covert CIA political action. The Center UA's political relations experts certainly guide pro-American candidates in Kiev the same way American PR people manipulated Boris Yeltsin in Moscow. As is well known, Yeltsin gave away the store after he became president of the Russian Federation. In the same way, the CIA promoted Yeltsin. Center UA journalists certainly make sure that pro-American politicians get favorable press. They spin the facts in such a way that Omidyar, who has made their operation possible, will be happy. The Center UA's stated purpose was to pull Ukraine out of the Russian orbit and deliver it to Western corporations. And that's what happened, along with the obligatory political payoffs. And that's, indeed, a few short years after Center UA was established, Vice President Joe Biden's son joined the board of directors of the largest Ukraine gas producer, Burisma Holdings. Hunter Biden heads Burisma's legal department and liaises with international organizations. The book, Flashpoint in Ukraine, provides ample evidence that the Obama regime and its privateering corporate partners overthrew the pro-Russian Ukraine government and installed a government packed with neo-Nazis and American elites. They did this for their own enrichment, and yet the U.S. media never made it an issue. It's business as usual. The average Ukrainian citizen doesn't benefit, just the super predator American elite who organized the coup. It's amazing to behold. Biden's smash and grab operation occurred in 2014. In 2016, another super predator, Natalie Yaresko, took control of Data Group, the company that controls Ukraine's telecom market. Yaresko at one time held a top job at the State Department, coordinating the trade and commerce agencies that deal with the former Soviet Union, including the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Check her out on Wikipedia. She's a part of the global elite, the IMF, World Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development Network. In the Clinton administration, she served as the chief of the economics section of the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine and helped pave the way for the coup d'etat that occurred there 20 years later. These coups take years to organize. Many more are planned. Well, you get the flavor of that chapter, how the CIA has spent 20 years planning the coup of 2014, and now we see how that's playing out as the people behind President Trump's reelection were quite aware of the corruption connecting to the Biden family, but the media, once again, was able to quash it. Pardon me. I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to skip over a couple of important chapters just because, well, we only have an hour tonight. And I'm going to go ahead to page 225 on the question of the Fast and Furious operation. And let's start with a question by the journalist Ken McCarthy. So Fast and Furious was not just a gun sting operation that went awry. Supposedly, the U.S. goal, according to Vicente Zambada Niebla's attorney, was to create a mega cartel. Does that make sense in some way based on your experience of watching how these things unfold? And here's Doug Valentine's answer. I think the CIA is the mega cartel. It might serve the CIA's purposes to have one central cartel in Mexico, but certainly no other organization in the world knows so much about drug trafficking. The CIA has computer systems that contains every bit of information about every trafficker and trafficking groups. It knows where they bank and where they invest. It can predict their moves, whether in Afghanistan or Mexico. It uses all this information to manipulate events. Since 1973, the CIA has been in control of U.S. narcotics intelligence worldwide. The function was taken away from the DEA and given to the CIA, which is the unseen hand in the Fast and Furious melodrama. The ATF and DEA are straw men in this drama. As law enforcement agencies, they're shoved out in front of the CIA, but it's the CIA and State Department that arrange what's happening in Mexico because, quite simply, U.S. law enforcement agencies have no authority in Mexico. The State Department's concerns about political relationships in the region trump any law enforcement concerns. Anytime a law enforcement operation is conducted in a foreign nation, it has to be approved by the State Department and the CIA. The CIA has the final say on anybody being recruited by any U.S. law enforcement agency in Mexico. If I'm in the DEA or the ATF and I want to recruit the Sinaloa cartel or anyone in a cartel, I have to check with the CIA. The CIA runs a background check to find out whether the guy is working for the Russians or the North Koreans. The CIA is always worried that the Mexicans are working for our enemies. You always hear about Hezbollah in Mexico. So the CIA has control over all informants recruited by the DEA and the ATF in Mexico, and the media knows this. Every reporter who works the Mexican beat knows this, but if they were to tell you, they'd be accused, like John Service or Chelsea Manning, of aiding the enemy. If they tell, they're revealing national security secrets. So the media is prevented from mentioning that the CIA plans the little melodramas you see. The script is written by politicians in the White House and Congress. The CIA carries out their illegal operations, and if one goes bust, it's pinned on some hapless law enforcement agency. So the view the public has of these operations is totally skewed. The CIA's purpose in having an informant in some Mexican cartel or running a mega cartel has nothing to do with law enforcement. The CIA is not a law enforcement agency. It's our mafia operating in foreign nations. I don't know which politicians and business people the CIA is backing in Mexico through these gun for drugs activities, but that's what it's about. It's about promoting politicians and business people who will enact policies helpful to America while suppressing the Mexican people. Those are the motivations behind who the CIA selects as an informant in a particular cartel. So the ATF, the FBI, these are all the fall guys. Valentine, yes. The others, yes, but the FBI is never a fall guy. The FBI also has internal security mandate. Sometimes there's conflict, but the CIA will work with the FBI to find someone else. The CIA's object is making foreign nations abide by American policy. The FBI is protecting the U.S. from any leftist threats. Its counterintelligence operations spill into Mexico, but they're classified, and you'll never hear about them in the news. They don't talk about the FBI in this kind of context in the news either. The FBI is the premier law enforcement branch of the U.S. government, but it has no authority over the CIA. It resisted the creation of the CIA for that reason. Under J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI also denied the existence of organized crime and the mafia until 1963. It took decades to get to that point because the crooks were anti-communist and enforced racial repression. According to a 1947 State Department report, Chinese nationalist forces were at that moment, quote, selling opium in a desperate attempt to pay troops still fighting the communists. The commissar of the Bureau of Narcotics, Harry Anslinger, knew that the Kuomintang narcotics were reaching Mexico. In a November 1946 report to Anslinger, the FBN's supervisor in New Orleans reported that, quote, many Chinese of authority and substance gain their means from the illicit trade. And that in a recent Kuomintang convention in Mexico City, a wide solicitation of funds for the future operation of the opium trade was noted. The agent listed the major Chinese traffickers by name. Treasury Attaché Dolores de la Grave, a former OSS officer, reported from Mexico City that 3 major drug rings existed in February 1947, but he made no mention of Virginia Hill's connections. Bugsy Siegel was killed in Virginia Hill's house on the 15th of June, 1947. In 1939, Meyer Lansky had sent Hill to Mexico, where she seduced a number of top politicians, army officers, diplomats, and police officials. Hill soon came to own a nightclub in Nuevo Laredo and started making frequent trips to Mexico City with Dr. Margaret Chung. Mom Chung was an honorary member of the Hip Sing Tong and had served as the attending physician to the Flying Tigers, the private airline formed under China luminary General Claire Chennault to fly supplies to the nationalists at Kunming, a city infused with OSS agents and opium. Dr. Chung, of course, we've read about her in other contexts. She was in the narcotics traffic in San Francisco, according to the FPN. Of course, she was. She was working with the Vander Star operation, and that all is all connected. The Chiang Kai-shek to AIG, Vander Star, Flying Tigers, Claire Chennault, all these are directly connected. And that connects you right to Chinatown, the great movie. Part 3, the Phoenix Foundation of Homeland Security. Well, the title there tells it all, doesn't it? Such a perfect democracy constructs its own inconceivable foe, terrorism. Its wish is to be judged by its enemies rather than by its results. The story of terrorism is written by the state and is therefore highly instructive. The spectators must certainly never know everything about terrorism, but they must always know enough to convince them that, compared with terrorism, everything else must be acceptable, or in any case, more rational and democratic. That's a quote from Guy Debord in comments on the Society of the Spectacle. The Society of the Spectacle, isn't that what we're seeing? I have to just indulge myself a second to reflect on how that sounds to me like people that are just watching television all the time and waiting for the next news program. Addicted to CNN, the spectacle, addicted to the spectacle. And as long as you can see the spectacle and know that terrorism is off, that's an option too. If you don't want to participate in the blue pill world, if you want to go to the red pill, you're going to have to realize that once you take that red pill, you're going to be in a world where terrorism does happen, and you could be snatched up, and you could be, you could end up like, the victims of terrorism historically, and victims of CIA terrorism even. David, I see David Underdown's here with some filling in some stuff here. AIG and George O'Neill, a Rockefeller fake out, sponsor Russian trolls with Warren Buffett, Patrick Byrne, and Flynn Intelligence. American University, Susan Rice Burwell. Okay, David, thank you. And I really think, David, you got some books in you. You've got some great books. You just get all that stuff organized, and you'll be a great author. Chapter 17, Homeland Security, The Phoenix Comes Home to Roost. In the articles I wrote about Homeland Security between 2001 and 2003, I said that America had been in an ideological state of siege since 9/11, when the Twin Towers came crashing down and all the moral and psychological prohibitions on the ultra-conservatives were lifted forever. All the anger and frustration that had nurtured during the Vietnam War and the Carter and Clinton administrations was unleashed in a torrent of warmongering. The anthrax-challenged Democrats climbed on the war wagon, and on the 15th September 2001, Congress, save for one glorious dissenter, gave Bush $40 billion and the authority to use all necessary and appropriate force against those who could be said to have been involved in what would remain largely uninvestigated terrorist attacks. Bush embarked on his holy crusade against Islam, but directed at Afghanistan and Iraq, not at Saudi Arabia, where his family's business partners and the majority of those officially blamed for the 9/11 attacks come from. To protect this misadventure into neocolonialism in the Middle East, Bush, on October 8, 2001, signed into law the Office of Homeland Security to detect, prevent, and recover from terrorist attacks, and, quote, or weapons of mass destruction attacks on American soil. The Homeland Security juggernaut was born. Less than 3 weeks later, again with overwhelming congressional support, Bush signed the Patriot Act, vastly expanding the government's domestic intelligence gathering and law enforcement powers, while rolling back individual rights and protection from government intrusions. The stigma of public accusations of his having stolen the 2000 election was replaced with a popular war of revenge against Afghanistan. Bush's approval ratings doubled in the polls. In the absence of political opposition, the Bush regime's rationale for neocolonial aggression was set in stone in September 2002 with the promulgation of the National Security Strategy of the United States. Through this manifesto, the national security establishment effectively conferred upon itself the divine right to launch murderous, preemptive attacks on any Muslim nation with valuable natural resources. Russia and China were long-range strategic targets. Again, this book is thorough and well footnoted, and a collection of essays and Doug's writing since he wrote the Phoenix program and since he wrote, as he was transitioning to studying the DEA, the BNDD, and the mafia, organized crime. Chapter 23, Propaganda as Terrorism. America's greatest strength is its vast military forces and intelligence services. This is what makes America the dominant world power, not its diplomatic corps, which serves primarily as a stalking horse. Americans identify with and celebrate their military prowess, their many wars, and their honored war dead. The extremist neocons were the group most associated with this militant ethic in America, but the Democratic Party under hawkish Hillary Clinton has adopted the same ethic. In order to win the support of the thoroughly brainwashed American public, this protected group of war profiteers portrays themselves as the guardians of America's prestige, which is symbolized by the military, which in turn is always viewed as heroic. For its part, the military's inclination is to always call for action, in high hopes of accommodating its financial backers and prospective employers in the U.S. arms industry, which need to expend ammunition and constantly develop new weapons in order to make profits. There are always vocal exceptions, but the policy has been in place for generations and advances on a specific course like an aircraft carrier fleet, which can only be tweaked and never driven off course. It is more complex than that, of course. There are also the dynamics of American culture to consider, the sense many Americans have that they are exceptional and destined to rule the world with an iron fist, a world that is hostile to the American way. Donald Trump is the popular manifestation of this America is victim delusion. It is the lie in the soul that enables America to project its collective shadow on, quote, the other. On April 4th, 1967, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. developed his famous Beyond Vietnam speech at the Riverside Church, citing a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. King said he had moved into an even deeper level of awareness through which he realized that he could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. On May 7, 1970, the eminent British historian Arnold Toynbee put his life on the line when he said in the New York Times, quote, "For the whole world, the CIA has now become the bogey that communism has been for America. Whenever there is trouble, violence, suffering, tragedy, the rest of us are now quick to suspect the CIA has had a hand in it." Toynbee was responding to Henry Kissinger's barbaric invasion of Cambodia. In fact, Toynbee continued, the roles of America and Russia have been reversed in the world's eye. Today, America has become the world's nightmare. Chapter 24, the War on Terror as the greatest covert op ever. The FBI defines terrorism as the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. Clearly, this ambiguous definition begs the question, when is terrorism lawful? The U.S. government's stated policy regarding terrorism is well known. It always condemns terrorism, and accordingly, America is never a perpetrator of terrorism, but always a victim of it. The war on terror is the ultimate expression of this stated policy. It is lawful violence in self-defense, not unlawful violence by a non-state actor for a political or social purpose. Politics is said to be the process by which people make collective decisions. But who really makes the overarching political decisions in America? Who makes terrorism policy? The continued existence of the big lie is truly phenomenal, given the mass of available evidence exposing it, yet it is applied systematically, without exception, as the essential feature of spectacular domination, with the desired effect. A majority of Americans not only believe it, they applaud it. They believe that the CIA officers engage in terrorism to protect them. Convincing them of this is the greatest covert operation ever. Well, I'm going to leave it there. Tomorrow night we'll pick up with the strength of the wolf and discuss some more about how the CIA infiltrated and took over and used the drug enforcement agencies basically as pawns and people to set up and engage in their little school plays for their own purposes. And I start to see, when we consider the fact that now we have all these great books like Poisoner in Chief here by Stephen Kinzer, and which is where it's revealed that the CIA was dosing people with LSD and other drugs to attempt to control their activities, their minds, to take them over? And was that CIA agents that were doing the dirty deeds? Well, not always. Sometimes they would use DEA guys to drop the LSD in the drink, for instance, or otherwise set people up. So that use of other agencies by the CIA, and then if something goes wrong, well, they blame the other agency. Very clever. And thank goodness we have these books to help us uncover the reality of what's been going on during our lifetimes. And I'm going to keep doing the best I can to reveal it. I guess the little bit I read there about President Trump indicates that Doug and I do have a different opinion about President Trump, but that's okay because really his work exposes this Phoenix program coming home to roost here in the United States, and that's not something that can be stopped by Biden. It can't be stopped by Trump. It's the CIA is running the show. Only people that can stop that is you and me, sharing information, passing around the knowledge that we gain as we study these horrific events together. Thanks for being with me, and have a good evening. I'll see you tomorrow night.